I'm Glenn Garvin, Chief Servant Officer, Life Center Church. We are in a great series out of Nehemiah, and we've been discussing Nehemiah's opposition to building the wall itself. But I realize in talking about this, we're 6 weeks into this series, and there's a thought that keeps coming around, and that is big dreams often have big opposition, big obstacles. And so this week we're doing Subterfuge and Sabotage, and I love that because it continues to go on, right? So resistance doesn't roll over easily. Often you have to push back, and this is what's going on as we get well into Nehemiah. And even Nehemiah tells us that the wall is just about done. It is just about to be finished. And yet there is still things that are coming against him to stop him. So this whole idea that these acts and practices of deliberate deception, inside jobs, all aiming at weakening Nehemiah's position and not being able to even finish the wall, even though it's almost done. Let me ask you a question. Is it really darkest before dawn? You hear this phrase, well, it's always darkest before dawn, and it's really talking about the light that comes in the morning and how beautiful that is. But is it really darkest? No, it's a phrase that's been around just for hundreds of years, but it gives us a sense of hope because we know we can make it through the darkest of situations because the sun will rise again. That phrase, I put it in the notes, Thomas Fuller wrote this in a book called Basra, Sight of Palestine and the Confines Thereof. And this was in 1650. 1650, this phrase came out, darkest before the dawn. And it really was a phrase of encouragement and hope that he was giving. I'm not a runner, and I'm really not a swimmer. I'm more of a walker and a floater. But there's a thing with runners. I'm talking about long distance runners and long distance swimmers, right? There's a thing called the runner's wall and the swimmer's fog. And although both these athletes use training and experience as a way to overcome these obstacles, they each need something very specific to make it. So for the runner, it's fuel or it's glycerin, or glycogen, really, not glycerin, glycogen. For the swimmer, it's physical, but it's much more mental. It's clarity or seeing the goal. There's this great story. You're closer than you think. It's a story about the long distance swimmer Florence Chadwick. And in 1952, a woman named Florence Chadwick decided to attempt a 26-mile swim between the California coastline and Catalina Island. Californians love our island, Catalina. During her swim, Chadwick traveled with a team whose job it was to keep an eye out for sharks and be prepared to assist in the event of unexpected cramps or injuries or fatigue. Roughly 15 hours into her swim, think about that, 15 hours, a thick fog began to set in and clouding Chadwick's vision and her confidence. Her mother happened to be in one of the boats at the time. As Chadwick relayed to her team, she didn't think she could complete the swim. So in desperate attempts, she swam for another hour and then decided to call it quits. As she sat in the teetering boat, she discovered if she had just continued on for just one more mile, she would have reached Catalina Island. She quit because she had no idea how far her destination lay. I want to let you know 2 months later, Chadwick's failed attempt, she tried to swim once more. She tried the same thing, 26 miles, and once again a thick fog had set in. This time, she had a mental image of the shoreline in her mind, and she pushed herself along. Not only did she succeed, but Chadwick ended up making the swim an additional 2 times. And as the article went, for good measure, Chadwick also became the first woman to swim the English Channel in both directions. The closer you are to finishing a project or reaching your goal, the more we face resistance and everything seems to intensify. Have you quit or given up an idea or project only to find how very close you were to a solution or finishing? For Nehemiah, like I said, the wall was well on its way to being built. There was really only the setting of the gates that were going to take place. 2 things happened, and they happened pretty much at the same time. One, people were not only exhausted, the people of Jerusalem, they were broke. And 2, Those who were against the rebuild made last-ditch efforts to shut the project down by distracting or conning, lying, or even trying to kill the leader. That's Nehemiah. The enemy always seems to fight dirty. What do you do when you're faced with trouble from within and without? You've got these internal and external pressures. No one likes to fight a war on multiple fronts, especially when not when the struggles are coming from within, without. Especially hard to keep focused when you're pinned from both sides. Observation number 1, as we read the text today, you expect enemies on the outside, but rarely from within. Nehemiah 1 through 5. About this time, some of the men and their wives raised a cry of protest against their fellow Jews. They were saying, we have such large families. We need more food to survive. Others said, we have mortgaged our fields, vineyards, and homes to get food during the famine. And others said, we've had to borrow money on our fields and vineyard to pay our taxes. We belong to the same family as those who are wealthy, and our children are just like theirs. Yet, we must sell our children into slavery just to get enough money to live. We've already sold some of our daughters, and we are helpless to do anything about it, for our fields and vineyards are already mortgaged to others. What exactly is going on here in Nehemiah 5? We see that in verse 6, Nehemiah had no idea there were these real problems going on in his community. And it had been going on for a little while, this process of people losing their lands and their fields and all this stuff. This plan to take advantage of the people didn't unfold until that a number of factors came together. And instead of figuring out how to supply help in a time of need, the rulers of the city and the wealthy conspired to take advantage of the crisis. That just gets me. Economy, politics, usury played out as the enemy of finishing well. First, the people faced this food shortage. That was bad enough. But second, just to be able to get grain, to get food, they had to buy it from others. They had no money. Remember, there's a famine going on. They had no money because they had no income while they were building the wall. And, to do this, they had to end up mortgaging, like I said, fields and their vineyards and homes so they didn't starve. Third, not wanting to continue to mortgage any more property or borrow money from their Jewish brothers because they had to pay property taxes, literally, to Persia, to King Artaxerxes. And the rates to borrow money in a devastated economy and a famine were exorbitant interest rates from their own Jewish brothers. Fourth, they were faced with this, repaying their creditors. How would they do that? They had to sell their children into slavery. Now, this slavery is not exactly what you might think of slavery. It was an indentured slavery. In other words, it was a way to pay off your debt. And so people would go and serve these creditors until that debt had been finally paid off. Keep in mind, God hates it when the rich take advantage of the poor. God literally commanded the Israelites not to charge interest to their own. Deuteronomy 23:19. Do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. Now, God said you can charge a foreigner. I love that. But not a fellow Israelite, right? So God had commanded this in Deuteronomy. It shows you how far the people had gone away from the laws of God on behalf of Israel and for Jerusalem. The conditions of the times and the city, coupled with this massive rebuild project, put extra stress on all the workers. Average folks, small business owners, and those that make the city run were struggling and could only turn to those with wealth and resources, i.e. mostly government, civil, and wealthy landowners. Does this sound familiar to anyone? We currently are in all kinds of struggles right now. These internal struggles of economy and health or family dynamics are very real. And I want to ask the question, how can we help each other without lashing out and turning on each other? Now, they cried out. Obviously, the people cried out. And it was amazing because when Nehemiah heard about it, he did something about it. Observation number 2, Nehemiah didn't go straight to prayer. You know, I've been telling you in this series that often when faced with overwhelming odds and things that were happening in the rebuild and all of this, Nehemiah always went to prayer. He always turned to God. And this time he didn't. You know, there's a phrase, a Spanish phrase, a mano y mano, and it means, you know, hand to hand or man to man. It was a bullfighting phrase. But this time, you know what, actually Nehemiah went, I rico y rico, rich to the rich. He really, he went directly to the landowners and the wealthy and the government agencies that were overseeing this. And so Nehemiah 5, 6, and 7, when I heard their complaints, I was very angry. After thinking it over, I spoke out against these nobles and officials, and I told them, you're hurting your own relatives by charging interest when they borrow money. Then I called a public meeting to deal with the problem. Man, back in the day, can you imagine? I think folks hate it when you talk about bringing a public meeting to really reveal the evils that were going on behind the scenes. So once Nehemiah heard this, he realized something is rotten in the state of Denmark. This is a quote out of Hamlet, obviously. Horatio speaking, you can see that in my notes. Something was really wrong in Jerusalem. Nehemiah alters his actions. This time he does not pray. He does not ask God to intervene. He thinks it through and he confronts the nobles. So Nehemiah didn't pray this time. Why do you think he didn't do it? I don't know. When do you pray versus when do you say something and confront the people causing the problem? One of the best leadership lessons out of Nehemiah was based on how he built trust with the people of Jerusalem. He consistently said what he was going to do, then did what he said he would do. That builds trust. There is your equation for building trust in leadership. Say what you're going to do and then do what you said you'd do. Observation number 3, Nehemiah reveals his wealth and modeled generosity in Nehemiah 5, 14 through 18. For the entire 12 years that I was governor of Judah, from the 20th year, and he gives the dates in here, he has this list. Neither I nor my officials. That's interesting because we found out that it wasn't just the officials, but it was even the assistants of the officials that were using this lack of funds for the people to really do some horrible things and, you know, overcharge them and all these other things. So Nehemiah says, neither I nor my drew on our official food allowance. The former governors, in contrast, had laid heavy burdens on the people, demanding a daily ration of food and wine, besides 40 pieces of silver. They were paid well. The rulers and the governors before him were paid well. And then he says here in that scripture, I mentioned it earlier, even their assistants took advantage of the people. And Nehemiah says, but because I feared God, I did not act that way. I also devoted myself to the working of the wall, refused to acquire any land, he required all his servants to work on the wall themselves. He asked for nothing. And he says, I regularly fed 150 Jewish officials at my table, plus any and all visitors that came from other lands. And then he lays out the provisions. You know, every day that he threw these incredible spreads of food, you know, and ox and sheep and goats and chickens, you know, poultry's in there. And then he says, every 10 days we needed a large supply of all kinds of wine. I thought that was funny. So we know that probably 3 times he brought in this massive gallons of wine just to have meals with these 150 Jewish leaders in the city. Which these are the same people that are taking advantage of the folks that are building the wall, by the way. And then he ends it, says, yet I refuse to claim the governor's food allowance because the people already carried a heavy burden. And that, wouldn't you love to hear government officials recognize the signs of the times and say, look, it's not right. It's not right that the wealthy are made more wealthy while the poor suffer worse. So, I don't know. I don't have any idea how much money Nehemiah had at this time. I just know he was able to sustain this over 12 years. I think he made a good living. That's when we talk about, you know, him being a cupbearer was not really the whole thing. He was He was the master, or he oversaw the entire court of anything that had anything to touch, the king's court. I'm going to say the king's mouth, but all the food and everything. He was much more than a cupbearer. So he mentions all these things happening in this time of rebuilding the project, rebuild project. For 12 years he was doing this. Observation number 4. Betrayal is a bitter drink. It didn't get just worse. It got weird. As if all the things that were going on internally, the people crying out, and him making it right by calling the leaders to task on this, by having them reverse all the things that they had done. But it didn't get worse. At the same time, there was this subterfuge that was aimed at the people to divide and wear down the resolve, their morale. But also sabotage was happening, and it was specifically to Nehemiah himself as the leader. So Nehemiah tells us later, on 3 attempts, Sanballat tries to sandbag Nehemiah. 3 different ways, 3 different times. Nehemiah 6, 1 through 4. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies, by the way, found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained. All that remained was the gates, the doors on the gates. So Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking to meet them in one of the villages in the plain of Ono. I realized they were plotting to harm me, so I replied, sending this message, I'm engaged in a great work, so I can't come. Why should I stop working to come and meet with you? 4 times they sent the same message, and each time Nehemiah sent the same reply. They said, come, we want to talk about this. Nehemiah said, I'm too busy, I can't come. Second thing, Nehemiah 6, 5, and 7. On this 5th time, the servant comes with an open letter. I put this in my notes. The fact that Nehemiah mentions it's an open letter in his hand means that somebody had already read what was in the contents of that letter, because these letters were normally sealed letters. In other words, they're normally closed letters. But this one's, Nehemiah says it was an open letter in his hand. Nehemiah could see said that everybody had already read what was in the letter. Anyways, this letter, what did it say? The letter says, Sanballat put this letter, there's a rumor going around amongst all the nations, and Geshem tells me it's true, that you and the Jews are planning to rebel, and that is why you're building the wall. According to his reports, you plan to be their king. He also reported that you have appointed prophets in Jerusalem to proclaim you as king. You look, there's a king in Judah, he says. You can be very sure that this report will get back to the king. So I suggest you come and talk it over with me, Sanballat says. This incredible attempt to get him on the 5th try, just spreading rumors and these letters like, we hear this is what's going on. Just all this falsity is going on, just to lure him into a meeting so that he could either kidnap him or kill him. It's pretty clear what he was wanting to do. The third thing that Sanballat does, and this is just the saddest one of all, Nehemiah 6, 10 through 13. Nehemiah says, later I went to visit Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, I don't know how to pronounce that, and grandson of another guy that I can't pronounce. And this guy, Shemaiah, was confined to his home. And he said, let us meet together inside the temple of God and bolt the doors shut. Your enemies are coming to kill you tonight. Your enemies are coming. So apparently, Shemaiah is wanting to let Nehemiah know, I found out there was a plot against you to kill you. Nehemiah responds and tells Shemaiah, should someone in my position run from danger? Should someone in my position enter the temple to save his life? No, I won't do it. Then I realized God had not spoken to him, but that he had uttered this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. They were hoping to intimidate me and make me sin. Then they would be able to accuse me and discredit me. It was just a well-trayed, lie. Well-spun lie or trap. That's what I was thinking. It's a trap. How very sad. This man, Shemaiah, was the son of a priest who was actually an intimate and confidential friend of Nehemiah. They knew each other very well. I mean, just the fact that Nehemiah would go over to his house when he was said he was kind of locked in his own house. There's other reasons I put my note in there. And they were close, they were friends, but worse than that, the young man claimed to be endowed with this gift of prophecy. You know, prophecy for profit is never acceptable. This shows up in the Old Testament. It shows up even in modern times. Prophecy for profit. Don't go for it. So even as the last pieces of rebuilding the wall was coming together, the enemy still didn't stop. Plots to kill, come and have a peace talk, come alone, stirring up perceived disloyalty to the king. All this is going on. Sanballat had no idea just how close Nehemiah was to Artaxerxes. Sanballat did not do any of his research, because if he had, he would know that the king thoroughly and completely trusted Nehemiah, and that Nehemiah was actually in contact with Artaxerxes for this entire process of rebuilding the wall, sending messages back and forth. I am sure of it. But Sanballat had no idea. And then third, this whole idea to force Nehemiah to run and hide. Let's hide in the temple together, right? And in a way, when you do this, it wasn't just the fact that he's going to hide. He's kind of going in and rushing in, declaring that he's guilty of something or requesting asylum. It's not in here specifically, but this whole running into the temple and locking the doors is much like this idea out of the Old Testament. It's only in a couple places. It's in my notes. It's going in and taking hold of the horns of the altar. And it was seen as seeking protection from God and those who are pursuing you to kill you. And it was interesting, like I said, these couple people in the Bible that actually did that. But the whole idea was to force Nehemiah into an admittance that he was doing wrong or had done wrong. Have you ever experienced betrayal by someone close to you? Were you able to recover from that? There is some universal truth about having and facing opposition and obstacles to finishing anything. And then it may not always be evil, or it may not always be the devil working against us, but there's always something. The bigger the dream, idea, or project, the more problems just show up. And when those problems are people, and often those closest to us, it is far more emotional. It's just far more complicated. I just want you to know, most people work very hard to overcome these oppositions, these obstacles, even when they come from people we've trusted. And these are people that really, they said they believed in us, they have our backs. But just like Florence Chadwick, not being able to see the land through the fog, we quit with just a mile to go. Nehemiah pushed through all of the barriers, threats, lies, trickery, and frustration to trust God and get the job done. I find it interesting that even Florence herself, when she went back to do it again and the fog returned, like it's another opportunity to do it. It's a do-over. It's a try again. Florence said, but I had the mental image of what the land looked like in my mind. Isn't that interesting? I have a friend of mine, Wayne Tesh. I always quoted this when doing the impossible. Wayne said, if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. Do you have a big God dream? I hope you do. I do. I absolutely do. I just want to let you know, don't quit. Don't give up. Hold on to your godly dream. Hold on to your faith in a big God who is with you through this entire thing, who does believe in you, who wants to see that succeed. These are dreams that God puts in the heart of humans. He wants them to succeed. Pastor Emily Sombrito, in a devotional she brought to our staff meeting last week, she asked a great question. Do we want to be a part of God's big story? Well, if the answer is yes, there's going to be subterfuge. There is going to be sabotage. There's definitely, like I talked about last week completely, there is going to be opposition. But God will see us through. Hold on to that dream. Don't give up. I want to pray with you today. Father, I just thank you. I thank you for big godly dreamers. I thank you for people that you have given just these elements of doing the impossible. And I pray, God, that the strength and the courage of your Holy Spirit and the peace and the power of what you would do in our lives would surround them and see them through. That faith would rise, that they would find their voice when the opposition needs to be confronted, and that God, you would see to it that they accomplish these big godly dreams. I thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen. I hope you have a big godly dream. I hope that you accomplish it. Let me know. I'd love to chat about it. God bless you this week. We'll see you later.